Okay. Let's start with a short introduction. Good evening and welcome everybody, and welcome to another appointment in this cycle of international video conferences on the Zoom platform. Tonight's presentation will be given by Alan Murray-Rust from England, and will deal about tramways in the Czech Republic, or former Czechoslovakia, covering the years from 1980 to 2016. This presentation will be done in English with some text in Italian, I think, also, because Alan speaks Italian too. And at the end of the evening, there will be a space for any questions in English or in Italian, and you can also use the chat in English in every moment during the presentation. I reminded you the complete program of the forthcoming presentation is available on our internet site, and that next presentation is scheduled for Tuesday, 19th March 2024, and it will deal with the quite peculiar transport system, Guidovia della Guardia, a unique transport system that used to operate in Genoa, Italy. So it will be a very strange presentation. Many years from now, it used to operate. Thank you. The floor now goes to Alan, but before, let me repeat everything in Italian. Buonasera e benvenuti a tutti a questo altro appuntamento nel nostro ciclo di conferenze internazionali. Questa sera è il turno di Alan Murray-Rust, che già conosciamo perché ha fatto altre presentazioni negli scorsi anni dall'Inghilterra, che ci parlerà dei tram nella Repubblica Ceca e quindi nella ex Cecoslovacchia in un periodo compreso tra il 1980 e il 2016. La presentazione è in inglese, ma mi aspetto qualche pezzo di testo in italiano. Alan parla italiano, o meglio, sta studiando. Alla fine della serata ci sarà spazio, come al solito, per domande in inglese o in italiano, ma potete usare anche la chat quando volete. Vi ricordo che il programma completo delle prossime presentazioni è disponibile sul sito internet, e vi ricordo che la prossima conferenza è programmata tra 15 giorni, quindi martedì 19 marzo, e si parlerà di quella particolarissima cosa che è stata la Guidovia della Guardia a Genova. Bene, adesso vi ringrazio e passo la parola a Alan. Alan, you can start if you want.
So can everybody see the screen?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Well, there don't seem to be that many Italian-speaking participants, but we have the footnotes in Italian anyway. I use them as much as a prompt for the things I'm going to say as for the benefit of people who do speak Italian.
Okay.
So here's the first thing to explain that this is only a collection of photographs that I've taken between 1980 and 2016, not 1985 as it says there. Some do go back to 1980. There isn't enough time in the evening to go into any detailed descriptions either of the systems or technical details of the vehicles. So I hope you will just sit back and enjoy what you have to see. Just to remind people where Czechia is in the middle of Europe, and a map of the country to show the places that I shall be dealing with. So as well as trams, of course, there are plenty of trolleybus systems, and we're going to start with Pilsen, work our way around this ring here of the various towns and cities, sort of in a circle round Prague, and then move east to Brno, Zlin, Olmutz, and Opava. Because of time considerations, I've actually left Ostrava out of this presentation because I'm hoping to do a further presentation next season on the Slovakian systems and Prague itself. To try and bring them all together would have been just too much for one evening. And Ostrava being a large and very interesting system, I felt I wouldn't do it justice by bringing it into this lot. So we're going to start in Pilsen. Just before we get on to that, just to remind you of the standard types of vehicle that you would see from the communist period. The trolleybuses on the left, all from Skoda, the 9TR, 14TR, and the 15TR, 15TR being the articulated version of the 14TR. The pictures here are actually of what would have been the later TRM and 15TRM models, which had improved technical equipment and a very slightly modified front end, but basically the same. The Tatra trams start with the T1, which was the first of the Tatra trams built under the PCC license from the United States, which then developed into the T2 and the T3. The T3 was largely a design improvement over the T2 rather than anything technically different. With the collapse of the communist group, Comecon, the number of types of trolleybus and tram increased considerably, so I'm not going to go into those in detail, although of course Skoda remained the main builder of trolleybuses for Czech systems. For each system, I've prepared a map. The green lines are trolleybuses and the red lines are the trams. Pilsen, of course, is famous particularly for two things. One is that it is where Skoda vehicles are built, and of course the other is it's the home of Pilsner type beers, which are world renowned. Tram started in 1899 on 3 routes, which formed the base of the system until 1949, when the main north-south route was converted to trolleybus. That route ran from somewhere around here through this part of the town centre and then along this corridor, which, as you can see, had become a trolleybus corridor. 1950s saw developments out as far as Nova Hospoda and also down south to Černica. Both of these were more or less villages outside the main town itself. They opened in the 50s, and then there was a large expansion up until the 1970s of the trolleybus and tram systems. We'll start by showing a paired view so that you can see how things have changed between my early visits in 1980 and a later visit in 2016. The 1980 view, the buildings are all rather drab and dirty. And yes, it certainly makes a difference that the other view has the sunshine, but you can see that the buildings have been considerably cleaned up. This is in the old centre of the city. As is this, you can see the same tower in the background, typical communist period with very grey buildings, a pair of T3 trams followed by a T2. And here's the same location. The building you can see here has been completely repainted, and we have the tram is one of the conversions to an articulated set made up of two ordinary T3 bogie cars with a low floor center section so as to provide low floor access for handicapped people. I think Pilsen was the only system where that particular format was used. This is the tram route number 1 out to Slavani, and shows what was typical of many systems developed during the Austro-Hungarian period, with the tracks at the side of the road rather than down the middle, which is the more usual situation. So there we are in 1985. In 1990, although the revolution has taken place, that it still hasn't really made its impact felt, and it's still looking rather drab, and the vehicles are still in the communist period livery. But by 2016, things are looking a bit brighter. The tram you can see here is the development of the T3 with a low floor center section, and in this instance with a redesigned front end. How much original T3 there remains is difficult to know. Many of these were rebuilt basically as a book replacement. In other words, they were revenue expenditure rather than capital expenditure. And although nominally rebuilds are in practice more or less a brand new tram. You'll see the examples of these in other systems. This was another of the ways of dealing with the handicapped access. A T3 car with a low floor center section, but the second car is still the original high floor type. Going back to 1980 and having a look at trolleybuses, this is in the center of the town at a location called Mrakodrap. That means skyscraper. And the building in the background here was given that nickname because when it was built in the 1930s, it was the tallest building in Pilsen. You can see here the remains of the original north-south tram route. And this is the trolleybus on the route that replaced it. 2003, and things have brightened up completely. This is looking in the other direction at the same location with a very splendid set of complicated overhead and a modernized 15 TR in the by now common green livery for Pilsen's trolleybuses. Same location a few years later in 2016, where the road junction has been replaced by a roundabout, allowing the overhead to be simplified. Back in 1980, there was still a few T1 trams. This is just to the south of the railway station on the route to Svetovar. We're now back in the city centre again, and this was a trolleybus terminus at Kopetsky Osady. Trolleybuses no longer appear in this location. There have been considerable changes to the route network, and the terminus has been moved elsewhere in the city centre. This is on the long route out to Chernivtsi in 1980. Quite a rural route. By 2016, the area on the left had been built up with small houses. This is a rather drab part of town, close to the railway station, but was the terminus of the routes which ran out into the eastern suburbs. You can see this little map here, where at about this point, and this was the terminus, it was a very inconvenient terminus for people living out in the east, because it was still about a kilometre short of the main old town centre, which is here on the left of the map. And it wasn't helped by the fact that the building around which the trolleybuses terminated was in a poor condition, with all this to catch any potential falling masonry. Bright day out in those eastern suburbs, Dubravka area, with a 14TR and the ubiquitous high-rise blocks that are a feature of the communist era residential developments. The tram terminus at Slovani, where the route to Černice also passes through, and was one of the relatively few places where you could get trams and trolleybuses together at that time. This was one of the terminal points on the long route out to Nova Hospoda on the west of the town at Skrvnjani. It's a short loop. The main road is here in the background, but the situation is that this particular location has been completely obliterated by the construction of a modern overpass, which is crossing the railway behind the bushes, which used to be crossed by a level crossing. So that particular place has disappeared altogether. This has changed as well. It's a little bit further out, and where I am standing is today the forecourt of a large petrol station. Back into the town centre, these are on routes which used to terminate at the planetarium, but were extended across the city centre, and you've got the articulated version of the 14TR, which is the 15TR, and a 14TR going the other way, and the tram in the now yellow livery. We've moved out to the far north of the system, the northern suburbs, once again high-rise residential development. The routes out to Bolivec and I forget the name of the other one, but the other northern one, were extensions of what had been the first trolleybus service, but which had proved inadequate to cope with the loads that were needed. So the trolleybus routes were converted to tram services. Couldn't possibly leave Pilsen without a view showing the famous brewery in the background with a pair of T3s crossing the river. Božkov is a suburb in the east of Pilsen, which was originally a farming village and still retains very much a village character. And in 2016, there were now very few 14TRs still in service. Next generation of trolleybuses, 26TRs, is one passing the main station, again with some complex overhead with trolleybus junctions and trams to get in the way as well. This is another main trolleybus junction a little bit further west, and this is towards the south suburbs terminus, and here we are again on the main route. Few route pictures here where the road the bridge was being rebuilt, as you can see, and the trolleybuses had to use the wrong carriageway. More traditional or typical high-rise flats, but with trolleybus rather than tram. This is in the Bori estate. And modern trams in the town centre. The Skoda Astra was the first low-floor tram from Skoda, and not the most successful of Skoda products. Larger low-floor conversion of the KT8 three-section articulated tram. And one of the latest Vario LF2 two-portion articulated trams. These were bought as double-ended vehicles quite specifically to enable them to be used where they had to put in temporary dead-end termini during tram track replacement works. So now we move on to Mariánska Lázně. Sorry. Mariánska Lázně may be better known to some people as Marienbad, was a small spa town but had an international reputation with a lot of high-class visitors. It's the smallest trolleybus network in the Czechia, with the main route connecting the station with the traditional centre, and then a route out to new housing development to the southeast and to the village of Velké Hledčeby, where there are also more modern housing developments. Because of its importance as a spa town, it had a station which was far larger than the size of the town really deserved. It's a magnificent building and makes a fine backdrop to the trolleybuses. Pańskie Pole is a small residential development from about the 1950s or 60s, close to the station. This is in the centre of the town, the main street, with plenty of buildings, many of which were hotels serving the people who came to visit the spa. And now we're up into the spa area again, with hotels and villas which would have been occupied by the wealthy from all over Europe. Very fine architecture. And in complete contrast, the typical high-rise flats in the southeastern suburb. This is the route out to Velké Hledčeby. It's got the short rural section, and then it ends in what still has a lot of village atmosphere at Velké Hledčeby. Next on our list is the Chomutov-Yurkov system. This is the most recent of the Czech trolleybus systems, starting in 1995. It's the only system in the country which is owned by two separate municipal undertakings, 75% belonging to Chomutov and 25% to Yurkov. It's located in an industrial zone based on open cast coal mining and metallurgical industries, although in practice the trolleybuses only serve the residential areas and the two town centres. This is Yurkov. The basic reason for the visit in 2016 was at this time Yurkov had announced that it wished to pull out of trolleybus operation altogether, which would probably have resulted in the closure of the system. But a couple of years later, the decision was rescinded and the trolleybuses continue to operate. This is leaving the bus station at Yurkov. The one other local route terminus in Yurkov is here at Hornik. The whole of the fleet, when I was first there in 2003, consisted of 15 TR articulated vehicles. This is coming out from Chomutov to Yurkov, and the concrete panels down the center of the road represent the section of the roadway that was originally intended as a tramway before it was finally decided to install trolleybuses rather than a tramway. This is the boundary at the edge of Yurkov, and at more or less the same location in Chomutov. Pizechna is the main terminal of routes from Chomutov, apart from the ones that go through to Yurkov. And by 2016, some two-axle vehicles had joined the fleet. We're now going to make our way back into Chomutov itself. Now here we are passing the depot junction through the various housing estates. And this is the edge of the town centre. The trolleybuses don't go into the old town centre, which you can see in the background, but make a loop round it. Vodny was the original main terminus for Chomutov in 2003. Although the wiring is still extant, services were changed to terminate at a new bus station near the railway station. So the turning loop here is effectively out of use. And here we have a modern trolleybus in the bus station. Remarkably, all these Trolino 3 vehicles were taken out of service in 2019 and sold to Szeged in Hungary. And we move on to the tramway between Most and Litvinov. This was built as an express tramway, standard gauge, basically serving the two towns and the large petrochemical establishment between the two of them. It replaced a meter gauge tram and a trolleybus service, which ran via different routes between the two towns and which had to be abandoned when the open cast mining here was developed in the 1970s. As the open casting increased in size, the old town centre here was also demolished and a brand new town built further south, with the tram routes extended through it accordingly. In 1980, the original terminus was at the depot here, but by 1985, the line had been extended, as you can see beyond, to a suburb called Velebuditsa, which was another new housing estate. And here is a T2 tram at Repubblica Ceca, and you can see that the track work still hasn't really quietened down into the overall landscape. This is slightly north of the depot terminus, and once again the interminable high-rise flats. And the city, the town centre is not exactly any visually attractive place, again with largely high-rise buildings. This is the main commercial centre of the town, believe it or not. This is just below the town centre, and the reason for this view, as much as anything, is to show the church in the background. This was the old town church, and as the coal mine expanded, in the late 1970s, the church was moved 800 meters to its current position, and it remains to this day the heaviest single transport move in the world. The church was built in 1517, incidentally. The other branch in the Most area leads up to the railway station, and the tram here is a T5B. It was a prototype tram, and I think was intended, the type was intended for Moscow, but wasn't taken up. And the two vehicles which were built eventually found their way to Most, and this particular one has survived as a museum tram. We're now going out through the petrochemical industrial area on the express tramway. The one thing you'll note is the high-speed catenary overhead for what was designed for high-speed running. We're now in Litvinov, where street track still remains, and passing the main church in Litvinov with a Tatra T2. That brings us to the end of Most, and we move on to Teplice. This, like Marianska Lazne, is an important spa town, although there was some industrial development after the Second World War. It's by no means an industrial city. Trams ran from 1895 to 1959, being progressively replaced by trolleybuses from 1952 onwards. In the 1970s, the trolleybus system was intended to be dismantled, but again, this didn't take place and the network was expanded. Since 2016, which is my last visit, there have been considerable changes with the introduction of combined battery trolleybuses, allowing routes to be extended without wiring. The feature here is that, surprisingly, these routes here to Novosedlice and Zemska, which were operating in 1985 at the time of my first visit, have been closed, although the wiring still remains, at least as far as Zemska and the depot here. I'm going to start by looking at the one abandoned route to Novosedlice. This is the terminus outside the village church, with a pair of 90R trolleybuses. can see that the route was not very well populated at the time and the road in very poor condition. On the route was this rather nice little bridge under an electrified railway. The trolleybuses had this separate bridge to avoid conflict with the electric overhead of the railway itself. Other road traffic uses a level crossing, so this is a trolleybus only bridge. And although the passenger service has been taken off, it's still used by trolleybuses as depot access. This is on the same route coming into towards town. I took some time trying to find out where this picture was taken. The reason being that the buildings have been completely replaced by modern stuff, so there is no point of contact at all. And although the wiring here still does exist, it's not in regular passenger service anymore. This is the main street. It was then Lenin Street and now Masaryk Street. Czechoslovakia was celebrating 40 years of communist rule with lots of red flags and materials, and of course portraits of the heroes, Engels, Lenin and Marx here on the local main cinema. Town is looking a little bit brighter by 2012, my visit, with the vehicles in a much brighter livery and most of the buildings repainted and refurbished. Even a spa town has to accept its share of high-rise blocks, and the trolleybus route had articulated vehicles because of the volume of traffic. Some of the replacement vehicles are not quite as big, being 3-axle rigid vehicles rather than articulated, but this is close to the previous picture. We're now in the main spa area, and this is an early 19th century spa building with a 14TR trolleybus passing. This is on its way to this terminus at Son of One, and you can see in the background some of the fine villas that would have been occupied by the wealthy visitors to the area. The location summit is particularly interesting because of the wiring. The bus has just come down the road to the left and is going to go down the hill towards the bottom, but it can't make a left turn straight away. It has to come round the loop here and go back down, and equally in the other direction, trolleybuses come up round the loop to go up the hill. So that's 1990, and this is 2016 with a brightly coloured vehicle making the same manoeuvre. It would be quite a steep turn to make if they were to come direct up the corner. This is the only trolleybus built as such by the firm SOR. They were trying to break into the trolleybus market, and they based the trolleybus on one of their standard diesel bus bodies. I think that the electrics may well have been supplied by Skoda. And although SOR are still putting bodies on Skoda trolleybuses, they are not manufacturing any trolleybus chassis themselves, and this remained a unique vehicle. The route to Nova Ves in the south side of the city climbs well up above the town. You can see the town down in the bottom of the valley. It's a very good climb up, very suitable for trolleybus operation. And the terminus is right on the edge of the town, looking out into the countryside. And one of the features of the countryside are all the hills with their pointed summits, which are the remains of volcanic activity from millions of years ago. We move on to Ustinadlabem, which is one of the larger trolleybus networks. It's a town of around 100,000 inhabitants and was an important interchange point for rail and river traffic. So you've got the Elbe here with its accompanying railways, a lot of river traffic out into Germany and down into the body of the Czech Republic or Czechia, and a junction for the lines which go down the northwest edge of the country. There was a tramway between 1899 and 1970, but they were replaced by motorbuses rather than trolleybuses, which did not appear until 1988. This area here was the first area to be developed, but the network has continued and is continuing to expand. The most recent development being this end here to Termitsa, the route for which extends across the river up to Chekhov. The feature of the town is that from the 1960s onwards, the decision was made to develop housing on the high ground so that it was free of the pollution from the chemical industry, which is the main economic base of the town. There is a large chemical industry area here and again at Neshchemitsa. So the fact that the residential areas were on high ground made it ideal territory for trolleybus operation. Here we are in the older town centre, and the service was provided almost exclusively at that stage by 15TR articulated trolleybuses. We're coming up to the northwest, and the fine pipe across the road, which would be providing heat to the large residential developments at Severny Terrassa up in the hills. So we're going to make our way up further Roosevelt Street, up the first set of hairpins. And up into the residential areas. Mirova is one of the two large terminal points in the Severny Terrassa area and has been laid out to enable a significant number of vehicles to be stored during the middle of the day between the peak periods. And you can see here the three different types of articulated vehicle that they have used, starting on the right with an unrebuilt 15TR. You can see that it's got the old destination box, the modernized version with the larger windscreen and electronic destination, and the more modern Skoda 27TR. Many Czech trolleybuses have the little green dachshund, which indicates that they are low floor vehicles. An unusual opportunity to get a full broadside of an articulated trolleybus. There are some more views in the residential areas. Before we make our way back down the other set of hairpins on Dulce. Bringing it up to date with the 27 TR articulated vehicle. We're now moving east out of the town centre, and it's probably a surprise to most people to find a working quarry like this only 1 kilometre east of the main town centre. But it's a very special type of rock which is much in demand, so the quarry is still functioning. Out towards the eastern end is the route up to the Scala housing estate, and a rare outing here for the what was the last remaining unrebuilt 14 TR to operate in Czechia. It only lasted a few more weeks after this view was taken in 2016, but by that time it was 28 years old, so it was definitely due for retirement. So we climb up the valley towards Scala. And here we are, Skalka rather than Scala, and here we are at the terminus. So these, and then we move down into the valley again at Mogier. We've now moved to the western end to where I showed you on the map. The extension goes through to a Globus hypermarket, and one of the features of the system that I rather like is the destination display. It doesn't tell you where it's going to at this stage, because what it is saying is, this is the last stop, please do not board the vehicle. And this is automatically displayed after leaving the last stop but one. So we're coming back past the area of the chemical industry. Sadly, these rather fine buildings have been demolished since 2016. This one, with its fine castellations, which is still an industrial building, does, I'm happy to say, still survive. We're now crossing the river to go over to Strekov and climbing the hill to the old village centre, which you can see here. And the route then drops steeply down on the other side. To end down near the bottom of the valley at Karla 4. And the route is operated entirely by these 3-axle Skoda 28 TR. We move on now to Liberec, which I've visited a number of times because it's definitely a favourite system. It's the capital of the local region, but developed as a very important textile centre, based originally on the mills up the river valley here towards the Jablonec, where there was initially a lot of water power available. Tram started in 1897, and it was the last meter gauge system operating in Czechia. Conversion to standard gauge started in 1995, and the main urban line between Horní Chanuchov and Lidovice was completed in 2005. The last route, meter gauge route out to Jablonec, finished in 2021, with standard gauge operations starting in November of that year as far as Vratislavice. The final section out to Jablonec is still currently under reconstruction, and judging by what one can see on Google Maps, it's a very extensive reconstruction. However, meter gauge tracks have been retained between the depot and the zoo to allow historic meter gauge operation to continue. Our look at the system is going to start at Viaduct, and we're going to go up the hill to Horní Chanuchov. The route climbs at an almost continuous 4 to 5%. That's 1 in 20 to 1 in 25 all the way up. And as you can see, there's 170 meters of height difference over about 4 kilometers. So it's a very picturesque route. 1985 at the viaduct, which you can see in the background, and this is the meter gauge, the T2 tram. And this is a standard gauge version at the same point. We're now moving up past the brewery, which has now been converted into small business units and some residential development. The old short working at Vapenka has been removed completely. And we will carry on up the hill. And you can see how things have changed between 1985, single track, a very poor state of the road, new bridging by 2012 with double track standard gauge. The hill in the background is a Yested, which is a popular resort. This is Dolny Chanuchov, which is a short working, and about half the normal service terminates here. And that was true both in 1980s and in 2012. Carrying on up the hill past the church. And you can see the extent of modernization, particularly here on the old road, which is in very poor here. And by 2016, it looks like this at exactly the same location. And with standard gauge, the tram has been put completely separate from the roadway. He's looking up at the terminus towards Yested and the modernized turning facility, which goes in the opposite direction. Right, we're coming back down to Viaduct to start a journey out to Jablonec on the meter gauge, of course. Is the depot junction with a nice set of mixed gauge point work. This is the main transport interchange in the city centre. We're now working our way out through what was the textile industrial area. All these mills had gone except for this one, which was just a shell in 2012 and will have been demolished by now. We'll continue our way out. This is the edge of Bratislava, and you can see the difference again as to how it was in 1985 with a rough road and single track. 2012, it was still single track, although the road had been improved, but completely rebuilt by 2016 with double track and in the road. And this, of course, has now been rebuilt again to standard gauge. It is in the village of Bratislava. And beyond Bratislava, following the valley of the Nisa. Rusec, a little industrial village with former watermill. By 2012, looks to have been converted to other uses. And this, I think, is an uncompleted industrial building that didn't get built after the end of communism. Very much a rural route through these narrow roads and then through the forests. Until we reach the outskirts of Jablonec. This is Lower Station. And you can see the extent of reconstruction even by 2016, before standard gauge conversion. This was the terminus in Jablonec, again looking rather drab in 1985 and rather less drab in 2012. We're now moving back into the city centre to look at the last section of line, and here's a T3 in 1990 with the very fine town hall with all its copper spires in the background. This is moving a bit further east, and you can see the mixed gauge track still in situ here. 1990, this is the Bohemian Museum before a lot of modernisation, still meter gauge, and a standard gauge car at the same location on the mixed gauge track. And here we are out at the terminus at Lidovice or Zoo, and this is one of the T3Rs rebuilt with a low floor centre section for handicapped access. Hradec Králové, this was one of the places that never had trams, with trolleybuses being introduced in 1949. The system expanded from then on up until 1965, but from 1967 closures started taking place. These stopped when the fuel crisis of the 1970s hit, and from 1993 there was a resurgence of the trolleybuses. Some routes were reopened and some new routes created. A feature of the town to the east of the old town centre is that it was subject to a major planned development in the interwar period in what was then the functionalist style, and one of the main buildings is the main railway station seen here, designed in the late 1920s by the architect Václav Reichel, and with a couple of trolleybuses outside, of course. Another big building of the period on the left is the Church of the Blessed Mary. And on the right, you can see more of the planned buildings in the period style. And now just a sequence of comparative shots from different visits. Surprisingly, the 21 TRs that they had were sold on to Brno. A rather fine church at the Novi Hradec terminus. And the route out to the village of Platica, to the west of the town, went through countryside, and because it was only a low frequency route, only had a single set of wires. However, by 2003, the wiring had been doubled, and there was also, at more or less the same point, the junction here, which served a new supermarket development. Since then, rather than two routes, the direct route to Platica has been removed, and instead there is a continuation beyond the supermarket running via different roads into the village of Platica itself. Pardubice, the trolleybuses started in 1952 with the long interurban line out to Lajny Bodanec. A main reason for doing that was to serve the large chemical and explosives complex at 17. And of course, it was 17 explosives, which gave us the well-known plastic explosive Semtex. Further lines were developed by 1966, after which there was no development for quite some time. It wasn't until 20 years later that new routes were built, and there have been further extensions recently, particularly now with the availability of hybrid battery trolleybuses. Before we look at the trolleybuses, we'll have a very quick view in the historic town centre. Like many Czech towns, Pardubice has a large square in the middle of the old town, surrounded by old buildings with some spectacular monuments as well. So the houses are 16th to 18th century, and the monument here, which is a fountain, dates from 1698. Sadly, most of these squares do not have trams or trolleybuses running through them, so I thought I would include this just to show what one can miss if one only concentrates on the transport. In the background is the green gate, which leads through into the square, and you can see here a 9 TR and a 14 TR just passing. And the same location in 2003, looking just a little bit brighter, partly helped again by having some sunshine. And you can see unrebuilt and rebuilt 14 TR vehicles in service here. On my first visit in 1985, the trolleybus out to Lajny Bodanec broke down, leaving the passengers to walk the remaining way to the village. I'm not sure exactly where this was, but it couldn't be very far. And certainly I and my colleagues either walked or waited for the bus to be got ready, because this picture was taken relatively soon after the same vehicle has by this time reached the terminus. A lot of rural scenery on the way out. This is getting closer to the town, and this area has now been completely redeveloped with commercial and residential developments. This was during the final stage of trolleybus development, and you can see here that the planning of trolleybus services has got rather ahead of the construction of roads. So the overhead is in position, but the roadway is far from complete. And the interesting thing, it was another 6 years before the roadway was complete and trolleybus services actually started. This is to the east of the town centre, and this is just showing how things changed after the end of the communist era. If you look at the building on the right, it looks completely different in 2003. It's amazing what a bit of paintwork can do for a place. And further out in one of the suburban sections, and the same road in 2003. It's interesting to see that the house on the right, unlike most houses, is still showing the dilapidations of peeling stucco from the long period when there was no attention to it. Yikawa is another smallish trolleybus system, again a regional capital with about 55,000 inhabitants. There was a single tram line which ran from the station down into the city centre, which opened in 1909 and was replaced by trolleybuses in 1948. A small network was completed by 1960s, and it wasn't until the development of new housing in this area that the big circled route around Brzezinova was created. A further route was opened out to Motopal in 1988. And there have been further developments since 2017, which of course don't appear on this little overview. This is outside the station in 1985. And coming down, an interesting vehicle, this bought second-hand from Szeged in 1998 and then sold off to Brno in 2011 for spare parts. Now come down to the town centre. One of the features of the network you can see here is the use of route letters rather than route numbers. This is the main square, which is one of the largest in Czechia. So it goes, you can just about see the top of it over here, well beyond this building, which is a strange building built as a department store in the 1960s or 70s. But this is the main city centre stops. same location in 2003. Back to 1985, a different angle looking across the width of the square gives some idea of the size. This is the upper part of the square above that funny building. And this is a different view looking along the north side of the square. The previous one, the church you can see here on the right was the one visible in the other last view. The trolleybus here on the left is making its way westward and will run along this street, Benešova, which no longer has a trolleybus service, as it was pedestrianised in 1993, and the service was rerouted further to the left of the picture. Feature of Jihlava is the considerable remains of the medieval town walls. Make a good viewpoint looking down onto the trolleybus here, but are also an attractive background when you're taking pictures at ground level. This is the route out to the south, and you can see here again is that department store building in the background. This is the big housing estate to the east of the town centre with the ubiquitous high-rise blocks. And the other route out to the west, looking very rural in 1985. And although the route survives, the area has been completely redeveloped with a lot of commercial and light industry development. Bujovica. This is an interesting place insofar that it has had 3 generations of trolleybuses. Again, it's a regional capital, but it's another place that is well known for its beer, in this case, Budvar, not to be confused with the American Budweiser beer, which has appropriated the name, but not the taste. There was only a small tramway network, meter gauge, which started in 1909, but did have a small feeder trolleybus along this, roughly along here, using the Sedestol system. That trolleybus system ceased in 1914, and trolleybuses then reappeared to replace the tramway system between 1948 and 1950. This second trolleybus system itself was closed down by 1971, but a new system again was introduced in 1991 and developed quite considerably up until 2012, with main residential areas here and the long route out to Borek in the north. And this is where we are with one of the then new 27 TR articulated trolleybuses. You'll note the catenary suspension for the overhead, allowing fast operation along the main road. This is the Mai residential area with large numbers of high-rise blocks and this large terminal area, again with room to store vehicles and a variety of vehicles. This is in the same area. Down in the south at Rozhnov, again, the route runs through an area which still retains a lot of its farming village character. These buildings on the left would all have been farmhouses, with the large arch being the access into the individual farmyards. And this is the local terminus. Back in the town centre with some of the older buildings, again the trolleybuses skirt the really old part of the town, which is off to the right of the picture. Fine railway station. A number of the services terminate in the area of the railway station. Trolleybus 02 is a Skoda 15 TRM and was rebuilt in 2011 from an ordinary 15 TR and put back into the traditional communist period livery with the red and maroon stripes. It's still in normal service in 2024. This is another of the large housing estates, the Vultava housing estate on the northern side of the city. Now we come to Brno, which of course is a very large network. Sorry. And has the largest trolleybus network in the Czech Republic and the largest tramway network after Prague. It's the second city of the country. It's one of the few places which had horse trams from 1869, replaced by steam trams in 1880, and electric trams came along in 1900. And the tramway network continued to expand throughout the first part of the 20th century. Trolleybuses came in 1949, and again the system developed up until 1956. From then, there were no expansions until the 70s, when both trams and trolleybuses were expanded largely into new housing estates. This is how it looked in 2016 with modernised trams and trolleybuses as a comparison with exactly the same location back in 1985. We'll start with photographs on a line that I particularly liked, which is the long rural line out to Šlapanica to the east of the town, which was in fact one of the earliest trolleybus routes. It's a nice little village, with the trolleybus, and hasn't changed much between 1985 and 2016, apart from the type of vehicle. And even then, that is not exactly a new one. We work our way up through the village. This is the edge of the old village, and there is a large modern housing estate now at that point. And this was what the same place in 1985. The area was the site of the Great Battle of Austerlitz in 1805 in the Napoleonic Wars, which spread over most of the territory that you can see in that picture. So we're now coming in towards Brno. Still quite rural, even on the edge of the city. On the 2016 visit, the services were diverted via a side street due to the reconstruction of tram tracks on the main road, as you can see here, with a pair of T6 trams crossing a temporary crossover onto a single track section with removed track in the foreground. A pair of trolleybuses were now joined by the 33 route as well, working our way towards the main station through this delightful bridge with its multiple arches, with separate arches for trams and trolleybuses. It looks like this on the other side, with a trolleybus approaching the main railway station stop, which you can see here. We're now jumping into Martedì, the main square in the centre of town, with a pair of T6s running through the square in 2016. The T6 was the successor to the T3 for Czech systems. This is what it looked like in 1985. What is surprising is that, in fact, the trams ceased running through the square in 1996, but then were reinstated 10 years later. One of the articulated K2 sets running below the cathedral. Pair of T2s with the Castle Hill in the background. This is Chester Square, which is a main terminal for trams and trolleybuses. And we're now changing over to 2016 with one of the modernized K2 articulated cars, now type K2P. Few more modern trams, the further modernization of the K2 with the revised front end designed specifically Brno, and which was applied to some T3 trams as well. This particular vehicle was built as a prototype for a series to be built for Moscow, which never in fact materialized, and it came back to Prague, to Brno, where it's been in service since. The final development of the two-piece articulated was a Vario LF car with the low floor section in the center. And again, the revised front end. There were also some KT8s, three-section articulated cars, all of which at some stage were modernized with a low floor center section. They're the only double-ended trams in the fleet, or they were at the time, which made them particularly useful when, as you can see here, you have a temporary terminus because the tramway was being reconstructed further down the road. This particular vehicle was running in a livery which was applied in 2014 to celebrate 145 years of public transport in Brno. By 2016, the latest type of articulated vehicle were the Skoda Electra. The latest trolleybuses were the 31 TR Skodas with SOR bodies. They were successors to the 22 TR, of which in fact only 6 were purchased. And they again were the successors to the 15 TR articulated. Again, only 6 of these vehicles were purchased, so it was quite rare to get a shot of them. Many of the trolleybus routes have quite steep hills, as you can see here. Looking in the other direction in 1985 at the same location. Nice suburban terminus at Barvikova. This is the village of Komin, an outskirts village which has been surrounded by high-rise development into which the trolleybuses, of course, do penetrate. This is down in the southwest, where trolleybuses were introduced in advance of a lot of development. There's a major regional hospital in this area of Bohunica and Novilitzkovets. And you can see here how things were still under development and still incomplete with mounds of earth around. Zlin, as it was and now is, although at the time I visited it, it was named Gottwaldov after the original Czech president. It was only a small town until the arrival of the Bata brothers in 1894, who developed their worldwide shoe industry from the town itself. So between 1910 and 1938, there was a tenfold increase in population from 3,500 to, to 36,000. The company effectively ran the town and developed it as a garden city, which was very much the trend for the period. A trolleybus network was proposed before the war, but in fact didn't occur until 1944. But even then, the trolleybus operation was a joint company between the Bata company and the Zlin municipality. The fact that Thomas Bata was mayor of Zlin for many years may have had something to do with that. After the war, new lines opened up until 1957, including the long line to Otrokovice, which gave a good connection to the main railway line, which you can see here. This is only a relatively minor branch line up into the town. This was the network as I found it in visiting in 1985, which is what shows on the map, but there have been a number of extensions since. This was the articulated vehicle that they got for the system, the Skoda Sonos S200. It was basically a stopgap measure because Skoda had not yet developed its 15TR vehicle type. The Yugoslav Sonos motorbus was chosen as the basis with the Skoda electrics, but it was on the whole not a successful vehicle because the transmission wasn't strong enough to deal with the torque from an electric motor rather than the original diesel motor. Only 77 were built, and principal users were Gottwaldov, Zlin, Bratislava, and of course Sarajevo in Yugoslavia. So this is the Otrokovice terminus, which is outside the municipality of Zlin itself. This was the town border where there was a short working, and as you can see, it's right out in the country. You probably won't be surprised when I tell you that there is now a large hypermarket on this area. Seems to be the case with so many systems. This is the main town centre stop at Námestí Prace, and the building in the background is the skyscraper which was built in the late 1930s as the head office of the Bata company. You can see many of the factory buildings here in the background, some of which clearly have the same sort of style, which you will see repeated in many of the buildings in the town as we go through. The building is now the local regional government building and has a cafeteria and viewing platform on the roof. This is town centre development showing very standardized planned building development. Named Revolution Street in the communist period, and now named Thomas Bata after the founder of the Bata Company. Typical garden city road with small houses. This is the depot building. Again, you can see the stylistic continuity with the buildings we saw previously. Smaller apartment blocks, again, coming clearly out of the same drawing office. One of the suburbs on the southern side of the town, up on the hillside, again with these flat-roofed houses are very typical of the Bata houses. It is to the west of the town, and again we have these flat-roofed houses and plenty of trees. Olomouc is a small tramway system, but the town was important even as far back as the medieval period, when it was one of the two capitals of Moravia. Trams were introduced in 1899, and it is still the smallest tramway system in Czechia. It probably survived because, unlike the other small systems, it was built to standard gauge rather than meter gauge. The line out on the east to Pavlovitske was opened in 1957, and then there were no further important changes until 1997, when this section of route to the station was built, followed a few years later by the new route out to Trnkova, which has since been extended and is to be extended even further. One of the features of the town is, for such a small system, it does have a full Grand Union junction with the ability to go from any one leg to any other leg. This is in the town centre in Denisova. And once again, I was fortunate enough, not deliberate, I have to say, to have been in more or less exactly the same position in 2016, when, of course, the town was looking very much brighter than on my previous visit. This is Republic Square, again, looking rather drab, not helped by the weather conditions, whereas in 2016, the sun had come out and the whole place looks completely different. This is the Grand Union Junction with a T2 tram. One of the other curves with two T3s and one of the small number of surviving T1 trams also coming through. Slightly different angle, but the same location in 2016 with one of the Skoda Astra low-floor cars. They were the first low-floor cars to enter service in the town. They were followed by the development known as Inekon. And here we have one of these passing the Maria Theresa Gate, which dates back to 1752. You can see these buildings in the background looking nice and clean in 2016, and rather less so in 1985. There's a front view of a T1 on the same street. It is the junction of the route which goes out to Nova Ulica, with a T3 and a T2, followed by a further T3. This is a Vario LFR. This is a development of the T3 with a low floor center section and a slightly lengthened body. In 1985, the route out to the east was cut short with a temporary reversing terminus here with 3 cars on the triangle. By 2016, there was still some unmodified T3s in service, looking quite attractive in the red, blue and white livery. This was the new route going down to the station, which I mentioned, showed you on the map. And this is the Turnkova terminus, a stub terminus, a temporary terminus until the route was extended. It has been extended beyond here. The vehicles of Aero LF Plus were developed specifically for Olomouc. They're single-ended cars, but with doors on both sides so that they can be coupled back to back to provide a double-ended set. And another view of the set at the other terminus, and if you follow the track down there, you come to the depot. So we come to our final system now. It's Opava. Historically, it was the center of Austrian Silesia with the German name of Troppau. After the Second World War, there was a certain amount of industrial expansion, as I think happened in many towns. The trolleybuses replaced trams between 1952 and 1956, and there have been extensions since then. The most recent extensions, which were in service by 2016, included this and this section where hybrid battery trolleybuses do operate. We'll find ourselves later on at Globus, which is a supermarket, at Katarzyński, which we will explain at the time, and at Albert Hypermarket, which is again another large commercial development. The route used to end at a small terminus down the road, which has been cut back. Feature of the town is the junction here, which is nearly a full Grand Union. There's just one curve here missing. To some extent, it replaced a section of route which ran across here to run out Katarzyński, which we will see shortly. This is the main stop in the town centre at Upper Square, Oni na Mesti. And as you can see, plenty of trolleybuses around. And here we are again back in 1985 at the identical location with a 9TR at the main bus stop. This is the lower square, Dolby Amnesty, and you can see a trolleybus on the left, which is coming up the abandoned route that I talked about, joining the main route, which comes to the right of the church, we can just see. And this is the 2016 situation with just a plain set of wires running past the church and the rest of the square now pedestrianised. This is the big junction to the east of the city centre, and this is looking into the town centre. This is looking north with a 14TR on driver training duties, and looking east in 1985. Still quite a lot of complication in the wiring, but not quite as much as there would be later. This is the Globus terminus, which is an extension beyond the original terminus to, as I say, a new hypermarket development. The vehicle on the right, number 83, is the only Skoda 21TR to come into the fleet. This is Katarzyński terminus, taken in 1985. if I had a similar shot in 2016, once again, the background would be an enormous supermarket complex. This is the northwestern route to Jacta. Nice bit of overhead here where it crosses a railway line. This was the Vikovska terminus that I mentioned to you, which has since been removed in favour of a loop terminus round, in fact, two supermarkets, Kaufland in the background and Albert here in the foreground, with one of the new Solaris Trollinos. This is another of the western termini, the city cemetery, and you can see the driver taking the opportunity to check the trolley heads. Back in the town centre, a pair of trolleybuses passing a rather fine building, built in 1928-29 as the Breda department store. It ceased to function as such in the early 20th century and was due for demolition, but there was a campaign to get it marked as a cultural monument, which has happened, and it is now being developed for communal use of various sorts. So that takes us to the end of this evening's presentation, and I do hope I shall be able to rejoin you at some time during next year's sequence when we will cover the rest of the Czech and Slovak systems.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much.